Welcome to George Demoin's Theatre of the Criminally Insane. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is George Demoin, and welcome to my Theatre of the Criminally Insane. Before I introduce this week's delving into the boards of the theatre of the larcenous and occasionally homicidal, I'd like to relate a little incident that occurred to me on the Aegean seacoast of Greece, in what the ancients, and moderns for that matter, call Thrace. If you've ever wondered what it's like to receive a telephone call out of the blue in the wilds of medieval Greece, I can tell you. I was snoozing in the refectory after the obligatory prayers these people insisted I underwent. Apparently they thought my soul looked as though it could use some salvation, and who am I to argue? Anyway, the abbot came running up to me saying there was a call for me. This took me aback because I didn't know there was a telephone there and nobody knew I was there, or so I thought. The phone was in the abbot's cell, a spacious little apartment on the east side of the monastery with a millionaire's view of the blue Aegean. The phone was one of those wartime Bakelite things with a cloth-bound wire. They always remind me of the movies, and they seem to inspire a reverent terror into the abbot because, however long it had been there, it was obvious he didn't get many calls. The receiver was live. Somewhere on the other end of the line was someone who wanted to speak to me. My first thoughts were the Halkidiki boys, and I definitely didn't want to speak to them. I picked up the receiver. "Hello? Is that George Demoin?" "That depends who I have the pleasure of." "I'm the 16th Earl of Dorchester. Now, is that George Demoin or not? If it is, I have a proposition for you, and a boat out of the mountain. If it is not, then I will say good day to you, and that will be an end to the matter." I began to extrapolate an answer. Aye, but was cut short. Don't prevaricate. I tried another tag. "A boat, you say? Look out of the window." I looked, and sure enough there was a boat the size of a battleship, with the price tag about the same size as the view. "Looks like you found George Demoin. And what can he do for you?" By midday, I was alighting from the monastic quayside with my meagre baggage and as many bottles of the brothers' home-produced wine as I could carry, onto a launch bound for the prosperous-looking yacht, and my one and only meeting with Lord Dorchester. "Now I want you to take charge of my wayward son, loco parentis you might say, and to be responsible for his fiscal allowance. I know you to be a man of deft experience in the affairs of the world. I also know that you are wanted for questioning by 72 different national constabularies, and have been actively contracted against by no less than 17 criminal brotherhoods." "You've certainly done your homework, your grace. I'm not a bishop, your worship. Neither am I a judge. That I'm glad to hear. So that we understand each other, I'm looking for a man of the utmost integrity, a man I can trust to the hilt. Know a man's vices, and you know a man's soul. You're a man with an abundance of vices, therefore the only man with the necessary depth of soul needed for the task in hand. You see, I pay handsomely, Mr. Demoin, very handsomely indeed. Are you prepared to imperil your soul, Mr. Demoin?" Well, you've read my file, no doubt. Cannily answered for a man who hides out in a monastery. Yes, it was true. I had been obliged to vacate the city of Thessalonica on account of the Halkidiki brothers getting the wrong idea about a consignment of tractor parts going missing. The problem being George Demoin is that he's preceded by a certain reputation. Completely undeserved, you understand, but a reputation all the same. It's one of being something of an astute operator, which I'd readily own to, but rumours will spread, and so poor George gets himself a reputation as a bit of a dark horse, which he denies strenuously. Reputation being a reputation, and tractor parts being missing, it's poor old George who gets knocked up in the middle of the night. The Halkidiki brothers are in no mood to be reasonable, so out I go out of the back window. See, it turns out that the tractor parts turn out to be not tractor parts at all, but a little nest egg the Halkidiki brothers were putting aside for a rainy day. Jewels, crack cocaine, former Soviet plutonium, that sort of thing. Anyway, there I am in the wilds of Greece at night, with the Halkidiki extended muscle force looking for me high and low. Well, it's time for George to pull a little-known talent out of the pack, that of amateur magus and sorcerer. I'd like to stress the amateur status of my amusement. A little conjuring. Pick a card, any card. See the rabbit come out of the hat? All good fun, children, all good... So you heard about the Necronomicon, eh? You heard some baloney about George in the black arts. How he can mesmerize the mind and get people to think what he wants them to think and do what he wants them to do. Well, I'll admit, it has proved a little useful, purely in the commercial field. In the case of the Halkidiki brothers, I thought it might be appropriate to spread a bit of soothing balm on the situation, sort of calm things down and make Uncle George an acceptable member of Macedonian society again. The gist of it was this. I'd find a quiet little inn somewhere, get out the arcane volumes and the anti-sacred incense, and incant a little conjuration to make them like me again. Hopefully they'd look a little kinder on George and forget those missing tractor parts. I found my inn and I performed my little ritual. The night was still and the heat oppressive, and I had my little Beretta automatic with me just in case of visitors. In time the room filled with a tangible mist. I incanted my wish and instructions and the mist disappeared. Well, we'll see what we'll see, I thought. It usually takes a few days for these things to work out. I get a feeling or a sign if my efforts have been successful, and then I act accordingly. This time things were a little different. Or let me rephrase that, a lot different, and not to plan at all. The first thing to happen was my imp appeared, a sprite by the name of Hobligoo. He looked like he'd done several rounds with the doorkeeper of the deepest vaults of Hades and suffered an artillery barrage to boot. He was extremely pissed, and told me that if ever I got into a situation like that again, my affairs would suffer a spectacular reversal of fortune. The Halkidikis had a powerful occult agency of their own, and I should have known what I was doing before I involved a respectable sprite in realms I did not understand. Well, I did say I was an amateur. The following day, I felt something ransacking my mind. This something was mad, malevolent, and female. Hell hath no fury, George. Take that and take it free and good. A woman is a deceptive beast. They are not made soft and seductive for nothing. Get a bad one with a grudge and a misguided sense of love for you, and she can cause you the merry Andrew of havoc from halfway across the world. I remember once... But that's another story. I could feel a woman in my mind. Not just the idea of a woman, but a whole thinking, looking about and plotting woman. And what's more, I knew who this woman was. It was Laila, the Halkidiki's shadowy half-sister. There's absolutely nothing a man can do in a situation like this. If you've never experienced it, then 1,000 pictures and 1,000,000 words can't possibly explain it. Someone's in your head and they are doing you chaos. Most people who have such a power haven't the slightest idea of just what they have at their disposal. It's usually a compensation for some defect in the persona. Laila knew it, though, and defective personality or not, she was in my head and in my mind, and I was powerless to prevent it. Laila was a witch, and my poor sprite, with his little olive branch of soothing peace, had been no match for her. No wonder he was mad at me. I wouldn't be seeing him for a while, but what to do about Laila? In the days that followed, I thought I would go truly mad. Day and night, waking and sleeping, Laila was there, and Laila was not a very nice little girl. Every thought she corrupted, every secret she threatened to probe. All I could do was a kind of ineffective passive resistance, but in time I felt her power weakening. Of course, I knew I couldn't keep anything from you, ladies and gentlemen of the world. Old George had bitten off more than he could chew, and he'd bumped into a piece of the genuine article, genus madness and the species of chaos. And that's how he came to reside in a monastery at Mount Athos on the Holy Mountain, hiding out from Laila. Laila was only happy in thunderstorms. She had been rough and tumbling with her brothers since she was born, and they were machismo men to a man. Though she couldn't keep up with them on the muscle front, she certainly made up for it in feminine guile. Consequently, Laila had a thing about men. Sure, she loved them in her way, but it was a cruel love, and the type of love no man was likely to satisfy. And few, if they were unfortunate enough to become ensnared by it, were likely to survive. So when handsome young George swings by and Laila's heart takes an involuntarily flutter, Mr. Demoin has just bought himself a thunderstorm. To cut to the chase, Laila fell head over heels in love with George, and that's when his troubles really began, because Laila was not the sort of girl to wish well of any man, especially one who's robbed her of a much-cherished superiority over them. I'm not saying we didn't have good times together. Get yourself a bad woman and your nights are unforgettable. It's when the sun gets up you have to watch out. Now, I pride myself on being something of a man of the world with more than a little experience of the fair sex, but Laila took me on a roller coaster of an education in that respect. If there's one thing a guy likes to pride himself on, is his superiority in the application of logic, leastways to women, on the subject of chess and football tallies. Give a man a tally of statistics, he's in seventh heaven, though it leaves women quite cold. Of course, I spotted what Laila was doing a mile off and was confident I had the upper hand. Apply logic to a situation and a man is master of the world, right? Well, you've probably guessed that George Demoin is a bit of a chauvinist, which is where it all started to unravel, because it was at this point in a man's journey that he discovers the limits of that much prided faculty and its complete irrelevance in the eternal conflict that is the battle of the sexes. The more she loved me, the more she hated me for it. And the more she hated me, the more secure I became in the belief that I was master of the game. See and act logically, and what could possibly go wrong? Right? As it turned out, just about everything. You might go through 1,000 lifetimes without encountering that twilight zone between the tangible and the occult. It is the arena of perception and the qualitative sphere of the mind, where the feminine in all its chaotic majesty is most definitely queen. With the brothers in fury and the hue and cry, Thessalonica suddenly became a very small city indeed, and with the Halkidiki phalange combing the highways and byways of Thrace, and all the bats of hell in hot pursuit, George fled to the only place likely to afford refuge and sanctuary, the holy mountain at Mount Athos. Things worked out pretty good at first. George applied his usual charm, and then some of the monks started coming up with wild notions of their own, that somehow a whiff of sulphur pervaded about George, claiming there was something untoward about him, and so he winds up migrating from one medieval seat to another until he comes to Dionysus. And that's when Darchester came on the scene, with his Cunard-sized yacht. When Hyperion pulled out into the sunset, it was not a moment too soon, for the Halkidikis were at that moment entering the medieval portals of Dionysus on a pilgrimage of a less-than-holy nature, the outcome of which would most definitely have been detrimental to the health of George Demoin. I was now to become guardian to an aristocrat's child, and sweet little Nathan came as close to anyone ever has of dispatching George's soul to the infernal regions. But that, as they most definitely say, is another story.